Midnight Ministry. We're not interested in your God. Posted by Mother of Ty. A little over 3 months ago, a man knocked on our door while it was just myself and our son home alone. I was working from home at the time, so my attentions were scattered between my son and my other responsibilities. It was the middle of the day, so a knock on the door didn't appear suspicious, although it was definitely unexpected. Anyone who knows us will call before arriving. Assuming it was one of our neighbours, I opened the door to a man that I did not recognise. Mid-40s, slender, 5'10", grey in hair, covered by a beanie, with worn jeans and a dusty jacket. "Hi, I'm Tom from Thomas Ministries, wondering if you could use any prayer today." I'm a nice person, not one to rudely chase people off of our doorstep without reasonable cause, so I kindly declined and he went on his way. I watched out the window as he walked down the street, not stopping at a single other house on the block. Seeing as we were the only house with a car in the driveway, I didn't think much of him picking our door to knock on. Fast forward a few months to last night around midnight. My husband is a night owl and is often up until 2 a.m. or so. Me and the toddler are fast asleep in our beds. Out of nowhere, the doorbell rings and there's a knock at the door. Our dog barks and I wake up. Our bedroom is just off of the living room, so I was able to lie there and listen as my husband opens the door. I overhear him telling this midnight stranger that we have a God, we're not interested, and to leave in a much more stern and aggressive tone than I am capable of. After the front door shuts, my husband enters the room a few seconds later and describes the interaction to me. The description and interaction matches exactly to the man that I encountered a few months earlier, except this time it's midnight and there is no ministry on this planet that would encourage door-to-door ministry in the dead of night. My husband watched this man do the same thing as before, walk down the street, not knocking on a single other door in sight. Now, I feel it important to acknowledge the lack of judgment on our part. The door should have never been opened. We should have called 911 or non-emergency and reported it. This was a mistake, and fortunately for us, it wasn't a deadly one. Lesson learned 1,000 times over, and mistakes will not be repeated. Our house is protected and we are ever more prepared. I sincerely hope that we do not encounter this man again. Thoughts of the ear-ons and Night Stalker documentaries swarm my head, and I think of how easily things could have gone wrong, how easy it would be for us to look past this and not recognise the signs of danger, given that the first time he knocked, it was just myself that answered. I can't help but wonder why he'd picked our house again to knock on in the middle of the night. I'd like to think it's just mental illness, but you never really know until you know, and I hope and pray that we never have a chance to. Weird encounter with a Ouija board, posted by Only Ravenclaw You Know. I had always been someone who was skeptical about the existence of ghosts and other paranormal phenomena. I wanted to believe, but could never find or experience something that truly cemented what I wanted to know. That is, of course, until a couple of my friends and I decided to mess around with a Ouija board. Yes, I know, it's stupid. This was back in the fall of 2019, and my local library had a Ouija board that you could borrow, so my friend decided that we should try it out, just to have some fun. I looked up some forums about rules people should follow when using the board and decided to go for it. We set up a salt circle in our room and turned off all but one light and sat in a triangle formation around the board with one person outside the circle to record everything that was said. I called out, and within 1 minute we had a response. It was terrifying, to say the least, and all of my friends had looks of surprise when the planchette started to move on its own accord. For an hour we had a conversation with her, the spirit, and I still can't explain what happened that night. I know that I wasn't moving the planchette. My friends said they never moved the planchette, so the only logical explanation left is that we truly had an encounter with a paranormal entity. I had conversations with a couple of my friends and co-workers who believe in the paranormal, and they said that they've tried using the Ouija boards but never got anything. I wonder why the spirit chose to interact with us, a couple of stupid college students. Hemoglobin, posted by Bloody Spaghetti. For many years I had a problem. Every now and again I would wake up feeling like a truck ran over my body, crushing every last bone in my body and tearing my insides out. I'd wake up dizzy and weak, barely able to swing my feet out of the bed. During these days my neck would hurt like I had strained it, regardless of what I did in the previous day or how I slept. I'd wake up feeling like I'm made of paper. My neck was sore and I'd feel depressed and lacking in energy. These bouts of strange weakness would occur over and over, ranging anywhere from 3 days of weakness to a couple of weeks. These episodes were incredibly random, and between each episode I was feeling pretty normal. A few years into my dealing with this so strange illness, I was diagnosed anemic. My red blood cell count was low, that is. I still remember the doctor's face when he was told my symptoms usually occurred in severe form during the episodes of illness. He seemed confused and unsure of what was going on with me. The tests, however, showed that my red blood cell count was low, and that's why they went with me. I was treated with iron, which, of course, did not really help. The episodes of weakness and low blood count kept reoccurring. Instead, I just learned to live with my mysterious variant of anemia. One day I was a normal guy doing everyday things. The next I'd be bedridden, feeling like I had the life sucked out of me. This went on for years, and I was almost comfortable with this sort of life, not like I had any choice in the matter. At some point I took a turn for the worst, and the episodes started turning more frequent and far worse than they had been before. It had gotten so bad there's about a 5 or 6 year period in my life which I remember nothing about, a piece of memory that was torn out of the motherboard. A chunk of my life turned completely blank. I remember lying in bed a lot with my body feeling like it's about to turn into dust while I still watched. The illness had gotten so bad I became depressed, to the point of pretty much self-isolating, because I couldn't handle anything that required any emotion or effort. Even when I wasn't having an episode, everything seemed too bright and too loud. The world moved too fast. People were too close, too touchy. My skin was always cold. I couldn't handle light at all. I hated it. Burned my eyes and made my skin feel like I'm about to catch fire. I couldn't even smell or taste things very well. It seemed to me like everything had been stripped of flavour. At this point, my depression turned into self-loathing, and hated myself for supposedly being too weak. I've hated myself so much I refused to look into mirrors. I went for God knows how long without looking into a mirror or thinking about how I look or anything. Really, I had even neglected my dental health, something I'm paying for now that I have a few teeth falling out after decaying away. My body felt like it wasn't even my own. I felt like I had been a passenger inside this foreign vessel, destined to cruise in it as a prison until the day it crumbles and turns into sand. Even when I wasn't having an episode, I wanted to not live anymore. Fortunately, the persistent pessimistic feeling of monotonous and pointless existence that gnawed at the back of my mind didn't dictate I should kill myself. I merely made everything feel as if the world was going to crash into me and grind me into dust, ending my miserable existence. All of that came to a screeching halt one morning when I woke up feeling like a building had fallen on top of me, crushing me beneath its colossal weight and breaking every last organ and fibre within my already decaying cells. As soon as I opened my eyes, the room spun like a whirlwind. The moment I raised my head, a sharp pain shot through my neck and shoulder, and my stomach turned violently, causing me to throw up all over the floor. That morning, and I still remember it clearly, I didn't get out of bed. I crawled out of bed in the literal sense of the word crawl. I couldn't feel my legs or anything below my aching stomach. For the first time in God knows how long, I felt emotion. A wave of cold something coursed through my entire body, jolting it awake. As I slid crudely out of my bed and fell onto the floor, my heartbeat increasingly got louder in my ears. In a matter of moments, I was hyperventilating and my body was on fire, almost. Everything in my line of sight swayed left and right. I thought I was dying. Something squeezed where my heart should be, squeezed painfully hard. I remember coughing this painful dry cough as I scrambled to my feet. Fear is a hell of an emotion. I wobbled my way into the bathroom, groaning and heaving as the ever-increasing waves of adrenaline bashed against my nervous system. The adrenal flood strained my body to the point of miniature muscle spasms. In the bathroom, I stared into the mirror. I felt my heart skip a beat. My lungs contracted and my muscles froze. A cold sweat made its way down the back of my neck, raising every last hair in its path. Everything suddenly started making sense. In the mirror, staring back at me, was a corpse. The creature in the mirror vaguely looked like I remembered myself to look, but it was far thinner, its lips twisted into a mixture of a confused impression and a snarl, exposing 2 rows of oddly long, yellowed human teeth. I caught a glimpse of the gums in the upper jaw. They were swollen, bright pink and clearly receding. The creature's skin tone was deathly pale, and its hair was long, haggard, and greying at the edges. The skin of this thing in the reflection was stretched awfully over its bony frame, and its face painfully skeletal. The eyes were sunken and almost lightless, cold, unmoving, staring. Patches of dirt covered its torso, and when a piece of dry soil fell out of its hair and right in front of my eyes, something clicked. Thinking back, I can't believe I didn't find it odd that I had soil all over my body. Then again, hindsight is always 20/20. The cobwebs in my brain were partially cleared, and some gears started turning again. However, years of neglect left their mark, and some neurons definitely were short-circuiting. It took me a while, but I figured out that the figure in the reflection was indeed me. However, instead of realizing that my awful condition was a result of an illness and years of mental and physical decline, I thought it was something else. Fear turned into excitement to the point of me tearing up for the first time in ages. The universe blessed me with a eureka moment, and I surmised I must be a corpse. At that moment in my mind, I thought I was in fact dead. That had explained the strange bouts of illness and the dullness of everything in my life. I wasn't feeling alive because, obviously, I wasn't actually alive. I've spent the rest of that day trying to figure out how I became an undead abomination. Obviously with little success, but somehow I came to the conclusion that I am not really dead, instead just trapped in a nightmare, one I must escape somehow. That led to the idea that I had to get hurt to wake up. After all, people wake up after they get hurt in a dream or in real life while sleeping. That led me to walk over to the kitchen, still feeling like a rag doll on a roller coaster, place my hand on the stove and light it up. Of course my hand burned, and of course it hurt, but the pain wasn't as bad as I expected it to be, even though I moved it right away, just as the fire licked it. I still wasn't convinced of being alive. That being said, I thought I was still thinking I was trapped in some hellish nightmare. Seeing this, I figured my best way to wake up was to kill myself in the dream. After some deliberation, I figured I should do that on the 28th of December 2012, simply because everyone was acting like the world is going to end, but we all knew it wasn't. It was just a matter of sarcasm and convenience, plus that specific date had a full moon. I've spent the next 3 months refusing to do anything other than sitting and staring at the walls. I hardly ate. In fact, I've starved myself for days at a time before my natural instincts took over and I was forced to eat. I could never stop drinking water, and even then I didn't notice it was wrong for a corpse to get thirsty. The illness came and went. As always, during these 3 months, my health deteriorated even further because I refused to shower or eat as much as I should have. I've kept staring at the mirror from time to time, and each time I looked like I was closer to start decaying alive. I'd cut myself occasionally and watch as very little blood trickled out. In my head that made sense, since my blood was basically frozen in my veins. Very little blood could get out. I couldn't even notice the fact that these cuts were very superficial because of a lack of strength on my part. Bruises would pop up in random places from time to time, and my skin got stretched even further. I was starting to turn ghastly pale. The one time I got out of my house during that period was to buy my cat, Attila, some cat food. Friday, 21st of December 2012 came. The world didn't end. I was sure mine was going to end in a week. The one I thought was fictional A week later, I drafted my will. It was pathetic. I hardly remember what I wrote, other than the fact that, for some reason, I mentioned Attila in there. After doing that, I passed out, clutching the knife I intended to slice my veins with before hanging myself. I'd even prepared my own little homemade gallows before then. Speaking of passing out, all that abuse led me to develop awful insomnia, one from which I still suffer years later. My sleeping schedule was erratic, random, and very limited. Every slightest noise wakes me up, and my sleeping habits are still all over the place. During my sleep, I felt something climb on top of me and straddle me. Something eerily cold. I tried opening my eyes, but I seemingly could not. Everything was pitch black. Something was shifting its weight back and forth on top of my pelvic region. Something ice cold. Even through my pants, I could feel the frigid touch. Absolutely exhausted by the constant lack of sleep, I nearly passed out again. I would have, had it been for a soft moan that filled my ears. My heart sank. I wasn't with anyone in ages. I hadn't gone out of the house in months. I didn't speak to anyone in a very long time. No one should have been there. This shouldn't have been happening. I ran my hand across the bed until my cold fingers touched something even colder than they were. Skin. But it was icy. An icy chill ran down my core as another soft moan escaped into the void. Something physical was straddling me and using me as a living sex toy. Luckily, my libido was dead. I opened my eyes again, only to realise there was a bony hand pressing against my face. It was almost blue, and the fingers were so cold and stiff they felt more like claws than fingers. I wanted to scream, but I could not. I was frozen in place. My heartbeat rose again, and I felt the adrenaline flood my nervous system once more. Wave after wave of near boiling blood coursed through my body. My heartbeat became unbearably fast. The things grinding became more forceful and feverish. It was emitting strange, choked noises of pleasure while I scrambled with my hand to find my knife. I could barely maintain a grip on it because the sudden rush of adrenaline made me shake. The bed croaked underneath me. I could still barely move my limbs, but the frozen finally moved from my face and traced its way down my chest. Whatever was on top of me had the shape of a pale, blue-skinned woman. The full moon shone all over her frame, revealing her in full inhuman glory. She cocked her head back with a thick, bushy, dishevelled long hair covering her pallid face. Even through her thick, bushy locks, I could see her throat was covered in red. Her odour finally reached me. She reeked of rot and wet soil. I must have gagged loudly because she stopped moving and lowered her head to face me. I had almost suffered a heart attack seeing the freakishly long fangs in her red stained mouth and her misted sunken eyes. Smiling, she grasped at my throat. Her grip was unbelievably powerful, and I gasped for air as she started moving her hips again. at an ever-increasing speed, her smile never fading from her shriveled face. Fear was burning me from the inside out. My muscles and joints ached, and my legs started spasming, causing me to scream like a dying animal. Soon enough, she was losing herself in the pleasure again, as she started gurgling, seemingly reaching a climax. Her head dropped, an expression of fear written all over her mug. Her grip around my throat loosened, and the black liquid trickled out of her mouth. A few cold droplets landed on my face, making me wince. She fell limp onto the floor. While she was nearing an orgasm, I managed to stop her. The encounter with this creature knocked some sense into me. Whatever she was a corpse. I wasn't that. I spent the rest of the night staring at the remains of the carcass, unable to remove my eyes away from her pallid form. At sunrise, instead of waking up from my nightmare in the real world, I've come to realize I was never in a dream. I chopped off her head just in case and burned the body and the head separately, just to make sure I would never end up in a nightmare like this again. I've gotten better since the illness disappeared. My blood is surprisingly healthy now. My mental state has gotten far better than before, probably as a result of better physical health and better circulation. I am never cold anymore, and my senses are wholly functional again. I'm aware I'm not a corpse or anything of the sort. I was the meal ticket of a blood-sucking corpse. That raises the question if this thing was technically alive, and I am alive, and we're all alive. What is the fucking difference between life and death? Sometimes I still wonder what this is indeed. Just some kind of hellish dream, and I will soon awake. Charlie the Ghost in My Room. Posted by I Am Whitney. As a child, I frequently watched horror films and ghost hunting shows, and I was fascinated by the paranormal. However, I never imagined that I would have my own real-life ghost story that came together in the form of multiple experiences and a dream to connect the dots. Prior to my story, I had multiple paranormal experiences that left me as a firm believer before I was 14 years old. However, the story I will tell you now happened between October and November 2014. I had just begun my freshman year of high school at a private school in North Carolina. It all started on a random October night where I was startled wide awake for no apparent reason at 1:56 a.m. This was unusual for me, as I never ever wake up in the middle of the night, and if I do, it's to grab a sip of water and then drift off to sleep within minutes. However, this time was weird. I awoke to a wall of silence that was so great I could almost hear static in the air. You know, when you are sitting in a room with someone you don't know too well in awkward silence, and you can see them gearing up to speak. Well, that is what it felt like in my room, but obviously I couldn't see anyone else there, and the feeling of awkwardness was replaced by fear. Well, since this had never happened to me before, I tried to ignore this odd feeling, and I turned over, trying to force myself back to sleep. Just as I began to feel myself relax, I heard a voice from the corner of my room say very clearly, "Hello." Within seconds, I was up and running down my hall, screaming for my parents, who frantically woke up and searched my room, looking for the person I was so convinced was in my room. Obviously, they didn't find anyone, but I was shaken and slept in my sister's room for about 2 weeks. After a while, I had convinced myself that this was a random, isolated incident, but what I found the most odd was that the voice didn't have a gender. It was just a voice and nothing more than that. This helped me to convince myself that perhaps it wasn't a voice at all, and instead something I had imagined, or a random noise that I had interpreted as a voice. So after a while I let it go and began to sleep in my own room again. Now, at this point it was early November, and I had been sleeping in my room again without incident for a week. That is, until it happened again. It was like clockwork, where I abruptly wake up at 1:56 a.m. for no reason, and the same feeling of silence and static filled the air. However, as scared as I was, I remained in my bed and reassured myself that what happened last time was all in my head. However, I was proved wrong when from the same corner of my room I heard the exact same voice laugh, except it wasn't the sound of someone laughing. It was someone saying the words, "Aha, ha, ha." Now, I don't know about you, but I can't think of any way that the wind, my dogs, or really anything could make this noise other than someone that can speak. And let me tell you, I was out of my room and screaming for my parents within seconds. They were of course concerned that I believed someone was again in my room, but they were mostly irritated I had disrupted their sleep because of what they believed to be my imagination. So, at this point I was convinced that my room that I had slept in without incident for 8 years now was haunted, and believe me, I didn't know how to explain it either. I began to beg my parents to do research on our home and see if there was any way it could be haunted. However, given that our house was built in 2008 and we're the only people to ever live in it, they rolled their eyes and told me there was no way. However, I will never forget Thanksgiving morning when it all came together. I awoke that morning after having a dream so vivid and true it feels as if I am reliving it simply by typing it here in my dream. I am at the end of the hallway, running frantically towards my closed bedroom door at the end of the hall, except my house is in flames all around me, and as fast as I run, it seems I can never reach my bedroom door. Finally, I reach my door, but laying on the ground is a piece of paper that I lean down to pick up. Written on it in messy handwriting says, "No one goes in Whitney's room anymore because of Charlie Bennett." Suddenly my door opens and there stands a tall man in his 60s who is wrinkled and skinny with long grey beard, black boots and a flannel shirt. When I see him, I can only assume that this is Charlie Bennett, the man who was haunting my room. Now, when I awoke that Thanksgiving morning, I remember telling my dad about my dream casually, not expecting much of a reaction, except he looks at me shocked and as if I had slapped him in the face, and he says, "You did not dream that." Because that is really weird. It turns out my parents had begun asking neighbours who lived in the neighbourhood long before our house was built about our property and if anything had ever occurred there. They found out that before our house was built, there was an old and abandoned home that homeless people had been squatting in. However, one night it caught fire and one of the homeless men died. Shortly after they cleared the lot and our home was constructed. Years after, it turns out my parents believed me the whole time. They just chose not to tell me because they didn't want to give any truth to what I was experiencing. But my dad's face and reaction was more than enough for me to know how freaked out they were. I have never seen him react in such a way in my life, and I don't think I will ever see him that shocked again. Now it's been nearly 7 years later, and what is so odd is that those 2 months seem to be random and isolated few incidents. I have no idea why it happened, and especially why Charlie waited years after we moved in, but I have had no more visits since. I have had random things happen here and there, such as finding the sink or stove turned on by itself, or my iPad moving into a different spot than I had left it. But other than that, I wouldn't even consider my house to be haunted. It is almost as if Charlie wanted someone to know his story, and now that I knew, he was satisfied and could leave. Unusual creature sighting by my girlfriend, posted by Asbol Mighty. So I've been trying to convince my girlfriend to tell people about this for a while now, but she keeps putting it off. I asked if I can post her story for her, as it's a story I find fascinating, considering I'm obsessed with cryptids and stuff. so here goes. So for a while I was studying in a university in England. While there I met my girlfriend, who lived local to the city. I would go back to my home in Wales for the first 2 years of uni during Christmas, Easter and summer breaks. The summer was usually a big long break, and I would use it to work at my part-time job to earn money to spend on nights out for my following year of uni. I didn't drive, and at the time wasn't getting along with her family, so didn't like going to hers. So every other weekend I had off work, my girlfriend would drive down to Wales and spend some time over the weekend with me. So during the summer between my first and second year, she had to leave early. She ended up taking a different route home, as I had a night shift coming. She agreed to drive me to my night shift to save me getting the bus, despite it taking her out of her way and meaning she had to take a different route home after dropping me off. She was driving along. Anyone who knows Wales knows that it is predominantly rural country roads with the odd town or village scattered about, and saw a creature run across the road. She slammed on the brakes, at first thinking it was a dog or a cat, but she said looking at it, it didn't look like either. She says it was huge, like the size of a full-grown Great Dane, and had no fur. The area this was in was near the village of Trenownid, on one of the country roads just off from the garage. I've asked her to describe the creature. She's drawn it a few times, but basically describes it as looking like an enormous hairless fossa. She's a zoologist too, so I expect her to recognise wild animals, especially since all we really have are red foxes, badgers, a few loose ferrets that have escaped, and farm animals. She's driven that route so many times since then, with me and without me, to try and spot it again, but to no avail. I even got her a dash cam, and she must have driven that route repeatedly over and over again to catch a glimpse of whatever it was. One more time, but no such luck. While the whole thing seems unlikely, and that maybe a trick of the light made something else look like what she saw, I believe her, purely due to her stubborn conviction that there was no trick of light and what she saw was legit. She seems to cling on to this with such conviction. I find it hard to doubt. Didn't see it myself, only know what I was told, but thought it would be an interesting story regardless. Not mine, but my brother's. I'll be saying me and first person things for easier narration. Posted by Baconator360YY. So this took place about a month back, when me and a group of friends got invites to a party. We went there and we stayed from 6 PM to 11, Me and one other friend were sober while everyone else was drunk, and we went home after dropping off everyone but my roommate. I noticed a dark red sedan. I think a Honda was following us from the party, or at least I thought me and my roommate arrived at the house, and up the road I saw the car drive past our street. I was relieved. I carried my barely awake and drunk friend inside. I laid him on his bed and put a blanket over him, and went and turned on the TV in the living room. I fell asleep on the couch and woke up to the sound of knocking. Now, we don't have much furniture, so the knocks echoed throughout the house. I was going to open the door, but decided to grab a kitchen knife before. As I went to grab one, I saw the clock say it was 12:32. I thought to myself, who the hell is at my door at 12:32? I remembered the suspicious Honda. I walked to the door, kitchen knife held like a serial killer. I opened the door to nothing. What the fuck? I thought, and that's when it happened again. The knocking and a quiet move of grass. My heart was practically in my stomach. I realized that this was not a door, because I quickly checked the side door. The only thing that I could have not been knocked on was the windows. I brought the knife with me to my safe and punched in the code. I grabbed my gun and grabbed a flashlight. I shined it out my bedroom window. Nothing. I moved to living room 1. Nothing. I checked everything. That's when I heard it for the last time. The knocking. I just realised the knocking came from my roommate's room. I turned the light on and shined the light in the window with my gun pointed at them. This man, as soon as the light hit him, he got up and hopped the fence into the neighbour's yard and ran off. They haven't caught him yet. Since then, I have given many statements and descriptions. The biggest clue was the car, but other than that, it's a cold case. And they said it was probably some drunk kid playing a prank. I've since moved out of that house and came back to my home state. But his eyes, those insane eyes, if you've ever seen a picture of Charles Manson or Ted Bundy, you know that horrible look and those eyes of someone who has no regard for someone else's or their life. This was something that rocked me to the core, and I feel so stupid for not trying to do anything and only scaring him off. Cravings, posted by Nicole Plow. You know that feeling you get a month or so into your new diet and you are craving something thick and delicious. Well, that happened to me last night. At first I tried to reason with myself that I didn't need it. Hell, I made a pretty filling meal that night for dinner. The only problem was that it wasn't enough to satiate my appetite. Bear in mind that I am a 6'3", 350-pound male with large biceps, so I'm incredibly hard to fill up. especially when I get my cravings. After about an hour or so of trying and failing to fight the cravings off, I let out a long huff and give in. That night I procured what I needed in order to make it. I'm a hunter, and so was my father. In fact, I learned my expert hunting skills from him. Anyway, so I catch it, kill it, and bring it home for a real supper. Cooking the meal was a breeze, as I had done it before numerous times. Preheat the oven to about 350 degrees. Season the meat good. Plop that sucker in for about 25 minutes if you want it good and rare. The only way to cook it, really, in my humble opinion, sitting on the stove, was some pasta and greens. The only drawback is the inevitable complaints from my girlfriend about the mess that I made while making it. She claims that I can make it and leave the kitchen not looking like a disaster zone. Why can't you? But once she takes a big bite of the meal that I had made, there's not one single complaint to come out of her for the rest of the night. Anyway, so after the timer goes off, I check it, pull it out and leave it to rest for a total of 20 minutes. I do this to keep the juices flowing within it. Afterwards, I add the cheese to the pasta and get out the big heavy-duty plates for me and my girlfriend Michelle. She works a night shift over at the gas station and will be home here pretty soon. I survey the mess and cringe a little bit. If she sees that much blood all over the kitchen, she'll do more than growl at me tonight. So I clean it all up and make sure to save her an extra ear to go with her dinner tonight. Later, she gets home and we eat our fill. It was good, but I tells ya, human travellers are a mess to cook, start to finish. How I Survived the Sleep School, posted by Nicole Plow. The other day, my friends and I were telling each other spooky stories before going to bed. That night, I heard it, the story about a little boy lost inside of a school that he could not escape from. Terrified, I went for my closet containing the rosary my grandmother had given me before she passed away that spring. I prayed with it for hours. I said God's true name aloud, asking him to protect me. Then I went to sleep. When I awoke, I was inside of the school, but I still had my rosary, along with a ball of red string. I tied the beginning around my waist, as it was so long, and proceeded to wander the halls in search of the room with the key. I heard the footsteps and said 5 Hail Marys, and the sounds suddenly ceased. I managed to find the room with the key, but something was blocking the doorway. It was the most frightening image that I'd ever seen. It told me that my friends were already dead, and that I was soon to join them. The thing lunged at me, but A white light started to glow from my rosary, the cross. The light scared off the demon thing, and I was able to enter the classroom and find the key. I heard my friends call out to me, but something unseen pushed me along despite my initial protestations. There was the exit door. I put the key in and unlocked it. I was greeted by a bright light and awoke to find it was the next day. When I got to the school, my friends were missing. I asked around, but nobody would give me a straight answer as to where they were. They just looked at me with a mix of concern and deep unease. I tried to text them during lunch, but got no response. Later I would find out that they had died in their sleep on the same night. Stalked by park creep when I was 11. Submitted by My Name Is Not Becky. I posted this before in either this subreddit or another one, but that account is no longer active, and I might even deleted it. This was like a year or two ago. It was also in a lesser known YouTuber's videos, but I recently was talking to my cousin, who I haven't really seen much in the past 4 to 5 years, who was also there during this, and I thought, why not share it again? This happened when I was 10 to 11. It was the summer after my parents split up. Me, my mother, my brother and my sister moved in with my aunt and her family for the summer, while my mum looked for a new place. Now, across the street from my aunt's house was a neighbourhood park. All the kids on the street play at the park. Beyond the park was a wooded area. One day in late afternoon, closer to night, we were playing in the park. Just another day in the life of a bunch of kids, when all of a sudden one of the neighbour girls screamed. We all looked to her and she was pointing at the woods. We asked what was wrong, and she told us that she saw a man staring at us from the woods located behind the park. The oldest of us being 11, we all got scared and ran home and told our parents. At first our parents were hesitant to believe us on the girl, as the girl who claimed to have saw him wasn't exactly reliable, and by the next day we had pretty much forgot all about it and were back in the park. We weren't there long when someone else screamed and yelled that they saw the man, resulting in all of us running home. This time our parents took us a little more seriously and all the parents went into the wood with baseball bats, but they found nothing. But from that day on, sighting of the creep kept happening. Kids were seeing him in the wood almost every day. Some claimed they saw him in the park at night. Some even said they saw him in the park during the day. But mostly they just claimed to have saw him in the woods. At this point the parents were pretty freaked and most stopped allowing their kids to play there. But so there were still a few kids who did. The big blow came when one of said kids claimed the creep grabbed them and threatened to kill them. At this point our parents decided it was time to call the police. So the police came and did a search of the woods and again found nothing. A police car was stationed on the street for a few days, but nothing happened. In fact, the sighting stopped completely. Now, I know it's possible for the creep to get scared off when the cops showed up, but you see, there is this part of me that wonders if this even really happened. Now, a thought that always crossed my mind is that this might have been a joke gone bad. As I said, the first kid to see the creep wasn't one of the most well-behaved kids and had been caught in lies before, so maybe she was just trying to mess with us. And it got so out of hand that she was afraid to fess up. Maybe other sightings were just our young imagination running wild with fear, as well as kids making up possible sightings in order to fit in. I say this because some of the sightings and stories from said kids did seem pretty unrealistic. But then there's also the part of me that think, what if it did happen? What if there was a creep? What if we were really in danger? And that freaks me out. I think that might be the scariest part of the whole thing. I will never know if the creep was real or not. How I survived a house invasion, posted by Snoo Pickles 1731. This story happened more than 10 years ago, when I was still a student. It has a few graphic details of animal harm and graphic violence, so discretion is advised. A bit of backstory. As with most students, I was always broke and had a few ventures apart from my part-time job to bring me extra money. One of them was house and pet sitting. I have always had a love for animals, so when this couple contacted me to ask to house sit for them for the last few days before they return from their overseas trip, as the last sitter has bailed on them and their 6-month-old golden retriever puppy would be alone, I jumped at the opportunity. The fact that they promised to pay me in full 2-week fee for staying there less than a week made it just more appealing. Little did I know how bad it would turn out. I got the details, got the keys from the agent, and headed over to the house, as it was already after 5 PM and almost dark. As it was early spring, I got to the house, which was a really nice place, but it bordered a not so good area that was and still is prone to crime, house break-ins, robberies, etc. It did not bother me much, 'cause nothing will happen to me. I know, young and naive. The first 4 nights went without a hitch, watching movies, jacuzzi, and generally enjoying myself. The owners would have returned on the 5th day, fairly late at night. I went over to check on the doggo. I got a call from them about 10 PM saying their flight got delayed. They are going to stay in a hotel and do the whole 3.5-hour drive back the following morning, and asked if I could sleep there again that night, which was fine. I was already there and had my overnight bag still in my car. I called my dad to let him know of the plans, as I was still staying with my parents, and he specifically asked what the address was. I normally did not give them details like that, 'cause I was old enough to look after myself. I still believe to this day that probably saved my life. I eventually got to bed about 1 AM, and it felt like I have only slept 5 minutes when I was awoken to a window break-in, and I could hear movement and what sounded like footsteps running down the hallway. The first thing I did was grab my phone and just hit redial. Thanks to my old Motorola phone, redialing was as simple as pressing one button, as my dad was the last number that I had called. Hoping that he wakes up from the call, I then dropped the phone in between the headboard and the mattress, in case my dad picks up, that he can hear what's going on. I had barely done that when the first guy stormed through the bedroom door. I could see his silhouette, and he had a knife in his hand. When he saw me, he raised it and came at me. Now, one thing to those that is unfamiliar with South Africa and the crime is that robberies and house invasions usually are very brutal and violent. People get murdered or tortured if they are in the slightest, even slightly retaliate or not cooperate with the robbers. Out of instinct, I raised my legs back when he came at me, and when he came within reach, I kicked both legs out as hard as I can. Now, I'm not a small guy, I'm 6'3", and at that stage I weighed about 100 kilos or 220 pounds, and I was fit and strong. My time not spent at the uni or work was at the gym. I could do an easy 250 pound bench, 350 pound squat. When I kicked and made contact with the guy, he completely lifted off the ground and shot into the wall. Luckily, the knife shot out of his hand as well. Before he got the chance to get up, I was on top of him, driving my right knee into his face and in return his head into the wall. I knew that my life depended on it, so I put in some extra force. The guy dropped like a sack of potatoes, but before I could get up I heard the sound of a pistol cock and I froze. It felt like all the blood drained from my body and I became just numb. I remember the only thing that went through my head was that if he shot me, that I would rather die than be disabled or dependent on other people that will have to take care of me. He stood like that with the pistol against my head for what felt like hours, but was probably less than 10 seconds. I did not move, and he eventually said in very broken English to get on the bed, face down. I panicked, but thought if he wanted to shoot me, that he would have already done so. So I did as he said. He threw a blanket over me, and I turned into a fetal position with my back against the wall, just so if they wanted to stab me, that I had my legs and arms in front to protect my body. Now, by that time I had forgotten that I had called my dad, and the guy that I had kneed is still down. I heard a third guy come into the room, and I could hear what sounded like Portuguese to me. I could not understand what they said, but I recognized it, as we used to go to Mozambique on holiday a lot, and that is the main language spoken there. The one guy tried to get the guy that I put down off the ground, while the other started to ransack the house, shoving valuables into a big bag. It was about this time that I heard tyres screeching and a car approaching at what sounded like Mark 1. The car skidded to a halt right in front of the gate, and I heard someone scream. It was my dad. The three inside of the house panicked and ran out the back door and tried to jump the fence. My dad opened fire, shooting in their general direction. Now I know my dad missed them on purpose. If he wanted to hit them, he would, as he is not one of but the best shot that I know, and I'm not just saying that because he is my dad, but he is ex-Army Special Forces on recess for those in the know. Represented South Africa in the Clay Pigeon World Championships a couple of years ago. Has various regional pistol and rifle championship titles, and is a gunsmith by occupation. I have seen him hit golf balls at 50 meters with his pistol. Politics and the racial situation in the country would have had him in big trouble had he hit one of them. I grabbed the house keys and pressed the gate remote, and my dad called the police while he came in. I met him at the front door and we walked out to the car to wait there for the police. It took them over an hour to get there. Some excuse of no vehicle available. By that time I had calmed down and started to look for the dog. I could not find her anywhere. I grabbed a flashlight from my dad and started scanning the surrounding yard, and as I got to the corner I could see her laying on the ground. I got to her and saw she was dead. Later autopsies revealed she was poisoned, and the police found pieces of meat laced with poison near the fence. Poisoning is pretty standard practice in my country for dealing with dogs at a house or area that is targeted for a break-in or robbery. I was fuming and so sad. The police was also pretty useless and had a don't give a shit attitude and barely took our statements. By that time it was starting to get light, and I retrieved my bag, phone and locked the house as good as I can without touching anything, and drove home behind my dad. Only when I got home I got the story from my dad's side. He said he answered my call only to hear the shouting and what sounded like fighting going on, and when I did not respond, he flew out of the house and raced over. Luckily, he asked me for the address the previous night, and he knows the area well to know exactly which house it is. Now my dad got there pretty quickly, and he said he stayed on the line the whole time, only hanging up when he stopped at the gate. My parents' house is about 6 miles from there through a residential area. It's normally a 20-minute drive. The call duration was 17 minutes and 13 seconds. I met the detective there later that day, gave my statement, they took fingerprints etc, and the owners got back about the same time. The rest of the day was a blur as I calmed down from the shock and adrenaline. Now, that is not where the story ends. About 7 or 8 months later, I got a call from the detective telling me they caught the guys and I must come to line up to point them out. I specifically told her that I did not see any of their faces as it was dark, and after the guy held a gun against my head, I was under the blanket and did not see anything. She assured me that they caught them on fingerprints and will show them to me beforehand, which might not be the ethically correct way to do it, but they wanted to have as much evidence as possible against them. You will understand why in a minute. I got to the police station, and unlike you see in the movies, there is no one-way glass or separate room. They bring the 3 guys into the room and make them stand against the wall. The one which I was later told was the leader, which was the one that I had need, looked at me with so much hate as I had never seen in my life. He had the eyes of someone that would slit your throat and not blink an eye. His name was Joseph Dragon Sambo. He pulled his hand up to his neck and made the slit my throat gesture. You know which one I mean. We left the room and the detective gave me a copy of his rap sheet amongst 4 other counts of murder. I think 8 to 9 for attempted murder, multiple assault, aggravated assault, over 100 house break-ins, and robbery and rape. I was shocked. The detective told me that I had not taken him out first and fast that night. I would have definitely not gotten away so lightly. Now this is also not where the story ends. 3 days later, I get another call from the detective saying that I should be careful as he had escaped from custody and they have not caught him yet. I was not worried too much, as the robbery wasn't at my house, and I had changed cars, so he probably could not find me. Also, I got a firearm license and carried my pistol with me 24/7. I did not hear anything after that until about 2 years later, when I saw the detective in the grocery shop. We started talking about the case, and she told me that he was killed during a home invasion. He broke into the wrong house, and the owner was waiting for him, pistol in hand. Shot him once in the stomach and once in the neck, and thanks to the slow response time of emergency services and police, he bled out on the guy's living room floor, ridding society of a piece of human garbage. I want to add a bit of info to this. All three that were caught were Mozambican nationals, undocumented and no fingerprints or ID in the system, essentially illegal immigrants, and it is of opinion in South Africa that more than 70% of all violent crimes is done by illegal immigrants, mainly Mozambican, Zimbabwean and Nigerian descent. It makes it fairly easy, because none of these countries have extradition to South Africa, so if it gets too hot, they just flee back over the border and nothing can be done to them. This whole ordeal has made me more vigilant and heightened my situational awareness, and made me a little paranoid to double and triple check all doors, locks, etc. Also, thanks to my heightened situational awareness, has allowed me to remove myself from a few potential dangerous situations. In the years after the incident, but it has also robbed me of my peace of mind. I have since immigrated to a safer country, but I still sometimes wake up at night if I hear a noise. So, to keep up with tradition, Joseph, we will never meet again, as you have passed, but to his cronies or anyone that wants to try something similar, please do pay me a visit. I will arrange your swiftly departure and reunion with Joseph in hell. And to Joseph, I hope you died in agony for poisoning Daisy. A stranger entered my house. Posted by Risk Fantastic. This is my first post. I just found this subreddit and made an account so I could contribute. My sister and I are sort of magnets to weird shit happening, so I might post a couple other stories in the future. This happened when I was about 12 years old in Kansas. I was sitting in my bedroom playing Halo. My parents were both out running errands, and my sister was at work, so I was home alone with my two dogs, a little terrier and a Bichon Frise. Not exactly the attack dog breeds, more like early warning systems at best. I had been home alone before. It really was not a big deal. We lived in a pretty safe part of town that had never had any problems, other than one time where some people sprayed KKK graffiti on some public park equipment. Anyway, I was kicking back in my chair, Doritos in one hand, controller in the other, full gamer mode, when I heard the very distinct sound of my door open and close, like someone had just come in. The room I was in faced in such a way where I could not see the front door. My dogs got up and ran into the living room, and so I just assumed my parents were home. I shouted for my mom to confirm this. I'm a bit paranoid due to the aforementioned being a weird shit magnet, and I heard no response. My dogs also were not barking like they normally do when someone gets home. I thought that was kind of weird, so I paused my game and walked out into the living room. Nothing. I felt the hairs on the back of my neck stand up. I had heard someone come in, clear as day. I was not wearing headphones. I had the TV turned down and was listening to music, so I knew it couldn't have been the game. I immediately went to my parents' closet and grabbed our shotgun, like a good Midwest boy tends to do. The only problem with that was that I did not know where my dad kept the shells, so my plan was to fake it and hope they didn't have a gun of their own. Stupid plan. I wasn't the brightest kid. At this point, doubt started to kick in. I actually heard the door. Was it the game? But then I thought, why would the dogs jump up like that if it was? I walked back into my living room, unloaded shotgun pointing in front of me. I tried to call my dad. He didn't pick up. I tried to call my mum. She didn't pick up. I tried to call two of my best friends. They didn't pick up. My 12-year-old mind immediately jumped to, holy fuck, they're all dead. And so for the first time in my life, I had to call 911. The operator picked up. I explained the situation with tears in my eyes from fear. She told me to stay calm and that the police were on their way. The difficult part about staying calm was that there was a hallway by my front door. I knew in my heart of hearts that there was someone in that hallway about to jump out and really fuck my day up. My two dogs were right by me, also staring towards the hallway. This did not help the fear. I stood there rooted to the spot for what felt like an hour, but was actually only a few minutes. The operator's voice in my ear telling me to stay calm. Thankfully, my parents opened the front door. What the fuck are you doing? I explained to my father the situation we are currently in. He grabs his pistol from the front room. Didn't know that was there. Thanks, Dad. And we go a-hunting. I always thought it would be cool to go around clearing rooms and shit like a SWAT team. But fuck if I wasn't about to shit myself every time we opened a bedroom door. We didn't find anything. The police arrived shortly after and told us that this had been happening over the past few weeks. People wait until homeowners leave, check the door, and if it's unlocked they go in and take valuables. They said whoever it was probably left when they heard that someone was home, which never quite sat right with me because I only heard the door open and close once. Ever since this happened, I have triple checked every door and window lock whenever I am home alone. To whoever walked into my house that day, I never saw you, and I really hope I never do. As a fun little postscript to this story, I told it to one of my friends and he goes, "You only heard the door once. You probably heard them leaving, not entering then. They were already in the house." That was not comforting. True scary sleepover story posted by Luke Top Secret. This happened to me when I was 11 and I was staying at a friend's house who I will call Kit. Kit was one of those cool kids in school who was always up to trouble. Looking back, I don't understand how I managed to remain friends with him for so long, as I was anything but cool and never did anything he did. One night I was staying over at his place on a Friday after school, and we started playing touch footy in the backyard, one-on-one. After playing for about 20 minutes, he asks if I heard a game called Mop, which I did not. He explained to me the way the game works is you hide by the road, and when someone walks or drives past, shout the word Mop, hoping to get some kind of reaction. I suppose the game can be known by any other name, but in my case, he called it Mop. I agreed, so we went down to his front yard and looked up and down the road to see if anyone was heading our way. I should know that Kit's house isn't actually on a main road, so the only reason you would drive down past on the left is if you had a house further down or had to turn down an intersection street for more houses, and about 20 houses past Kit's is a bush, so I wasn't expecting many people to pass by. I hid behind the garbage bins which stand by the driveway fence, and Kit was hiding in the opposite side in the garden. At this point it was about 4 p.m, so it was still light out, which made the game sound less fun. About 2 minutes in, a car drives by and Kit shouts out, "Mop." Nothing happened, which was no surprise too. I knew someone driving by wouldn't be able to hear us. Not long after, a man and woman were walking their dog, and as they were about to walk out of my sight, Kit shouts out, "Mop." The man and woman stopped and looked around, confused, for about 5 seconds. Then they started walking again. That was the exact reaction I was expecting. After about 10 more disappointing reactions, I was starting to get bored, but Kit was just having too much fun. Eventually I noticed a homeless looking man making his way over. Kit couldn't have seen him yet, so I gave him the signal that someone was near and he waited. As the man was getting closer, I could see that he was talking to himself, like he was arguing with someone. As he got closer, I could see that he was at least in his 40s. I could see how dirty he looked. He had long, greasy, black hair, and his face was covered in dirt. I was starting to get nervous. When the man was going past my sight, I heard Kit shout out something I was not expecting. He shouts out, "Dickhead." The man looked right towards the house in an instant, looking absolutely furious. I was freaking out, as the man could have easily spotted me hiding behind the bins. The man started passing back and forth, his eyes fixed on the house, looking, muttering to himself. Eventually he started walking back the way he was heading, and once he was out of my view, I got out from behind the bins and made my way over to Kit. I was about to open my mouth to tell him how stupid that was when he said, "Let's follow him." I told him that was a terrible idea, but as a stupid 11-year-old kid, I agreed. We kept going at a distance and followed the man off the road, and at the entrance to the bush, we hid behind a car and watched the man as he went into the bush. I wish I could say we headed back right then, but Kit wanted to see where he was going, so we followed. Kit went in first, and I followed close behind. I was walking as quietly as possible, but the leaves were all dry, so they crunched really loudly as I walked over them. About 5 minutes into following Kit, he stopped dead in his tracks, and I heard him mutter to himself, "Oh, fuck." I walked up next to him, and just ahead, behind some rocks, there was the man crouched down, looking right at us. I didn't have time to react as the man stood up and sprinted towards us, shouting like a madman. Kit and I turned and ran, screaming. I could just sense the man's presence closing in on me, and I was fearing that any second he would grab me, and that would be the end of me. Lucky for me, the man tripped and fell. I remember just feeling the air move under the man's body, just inches behind me. I was easily in arm's reach. Hearing the man fall, I slowed down and looked back and saw him lying flat on his stomach, and he let out an angry growl. I turned and continued running. I couldn't see Kit at that point, but I could hear the crunching of leaves and branches, so I knew he was very close. Eventually I got out of the bush and started running on the road back to the house. When I got there, Kit was already there, out of breath, sweating. I started to cry due to fear that I could have been murdered. I never spoke of this story to anyone, and Kit apparently hasn't either. I haven't been to Kit's house since. My deepest apologies to that man whom my friend and I mistreated. Creepy new neighbourhood woman, posted by Dominator Horton. Creepy new neighbour. This started a couple of days ago in my hometown in Alberta, Canada. My mum told me to walk the dog before Dad gets home from work. My dad sometimes gets home late from work in the police. This particular day, he was quite a bit later than usual, but I didn't know that, so I took the dog for a walk at 8:20 p.m. ish. I usually just let my dog lead the walk. He is getting on a bit now and knows how far he wants to walk. He pulled me down the path to the river to get a drink. As soon as we get off the paved path to walk the 100 meters to the river, we encountered this woman. I'd never seen her before, but I'm not one to judge from the look. So we exchanged some small talk while the dogs do their own thing. It started off a normal conversation, consisting of her saying she had just moved here from the city just down the road. Then the conversation went a little different. She asked what time I got to bed and what time I got up in the morning. I didn't really catch on at that point. I'm a teenager, so I say I go to sleep at like 3 in the morning and get up at 12. She asked what I did during that time. I said I play video games with the boys. Then she asked where I lived. I gave her a very short description and said I was just a few doors down from the path to the river. We then said our goodbyes and parted ways. We got down to the river and my dog drank a lot of water. I was probably standing there for about 5 minutes waiting for him to finish. The whole time I was standing there, I felt uneasy, and when I turned around, that woman that I had spoken to was just staring at me on the paved path. It was fairly open around there. I thought maybe she wasn't looking at me and was just looking at something at the other side of the river. I started walking towards the trees, which is a bit of a walk on the stone beach. When I looked back, her head is following me. I get to the path and follow the already trodden down path that's right next to the river. It's a fairly long path. It takes 15 to 20 minutes to walk through. The paved path is parallel to the beaten grass and mud path that I had been taking. I kept hearing sudden, 3 in a row footsteps on the paved path. Tap, 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 constantly. It was keeping up with me, and I still felt uneasy, like I was being watched. But I kept my composure and just kept walking. I got to the T-split in the path, where you can go back up to the path or keep going. I chose to go back up as my turn off to get back to my house is at the top. I'm walking cautiously up to the path because we get a few snakes around that area, and I look to my left to see the 3 dogs she was carrying running through the woods, and her crouched down in and among the trees. I at this point feel really uncomfortable, so I decide to speed walk home and keep checking behind me the whole time to make sure I wasn't followed. Cut to the next day. I was again told to walk the dog, but today I went a different way, so I didn't encounter this woman again. I started walking, and about 5 minutes in, I get that same feeling from yesterday, the feeling of uneasiness. I look around, and surely enough, I spot that woman. She is standing there, talking to her dogs. At this point I thought nothing bad, because I talk to my dog too. I thought it was just a coincidence, so I continue the walk and run into some friends, talk with them for a bit, then keep walking. I was still feeling uneasy. When I had stopped to talk to my friends, the woman also stopped, and I guess tried to make it seem like she was looking at someone's house that was for sale, and as soon as I started walking, she did too. It's like she was following me. I thought it may stop if I speed up, but she stayed very close behind me, no matter what I did. It was about lunchtime at this point, and as a teenager I was very hungry, so I walked home to make myself a sandwich. She followed me all the way home, so I locked all the doors and got my food. Cut to that evening. For dinner it was a really nice day, so we decided to eat dinner outside on the back deck, which faces out into the backyard. That has a path that no one really uses behind the yard fence. We get onto the deck, and out the corner of my eyes I see something moving around on that path. Looked over and saw that woman walking her dogs. I thought it was creepy, but then she walked past the house over and over and over again, looking up at me each time, until eventually she stopped and stared at me for what felt like a lifetime, but was probably around 10 seconds. Then she walked off. Cut to today. I still feel really uneasy going anywhere near my deck or yard, but I didn't have to walk the dog today as my dad did when he got home. But each time I looked out of the window I saw her, but she always scurries off before I see too much. So crazy woman I met down by the river, let's not meet again, ever. useless sixth sense, posted by Psychopath MX. From a very young age, I realised that I have this kind of sixth sense to see beyond the natural world. I mean that I am literally able to observe what I think are presences of another dimension moving among us humans. I think it's like the spirit world or something like that. I don't know. I don't know why God or the universe or whatever gave me this sixth sense. It's not cool at all. I did not ask to have this. It is desperate not being able to do anything about it. I'd give anything to be ignorant of the things around us. I consider it much more a curse than a blessing. It is really useless that I have it. It does not help me at all. It only hinders me, and I cannot get rid of this power. I tried to talk to my parents and family about what I saw since I was a child, but the vast majority never believed me, or they called me crazy, sick, or that I had a lot of imagination. So I soon discovered that it would be better to keep quiet and not talk about what they are ignorant of, the true reality that surrounds us. I learned that I would always be alone with this situation. The only person who believed me was my grandmother, who also said that she saw and felt things, but she hardly ever went into much detail about her ability. She was almost totally hermetic about it, and now, many years after her passing, I can really come to understand why she didn't talk about it. Why so much secrecy? It happens to me like in the Sixth Sense movie with Haley Joel Osment as Cole Sear. Very similar to that, only that these presences are permanently everywhere. It is not like I suddenly see one and then more than a while after another one of them appears. They are always there. They never leave. Even with my eyes closed, I can see them. It is difficult to explain, but I see them most of the time as humanoid figures made of a very fine static, almost imperceptible. If I stare at them directly and concentrate, especially at night, they become more real for me. I see their facial features, like noses, what would be the shape of their heads, almost the same as ours, humans. Their shoulders and even their eyes are of a very rare, pale white colour, and they know that I can see them. Sometimes over the years they have shown me those things have interacted with me. For example, they seem to approach me. They have made me feel so much uglier, that electrified sensation in my head, and even somehow they have made me feel a kind of waves of heat, not so much to literally burn my skin, but yes, to make me sweat and feel a strange embarrassment. This is rarely when this happens. They are there around me or us every second without rest, every day, day and night, wherever I go. In the case of going out of my house, I don't really know if they are the same entities who follow me, but I dare to say that there are millions more of them on the street outside my home, for which obviously I also feel observed and surrounded. I have also experienced interaction with another dimension when they move some things in front of my own eyes, or when I am about to sleep. Even with my eyes closed, I can see and feel what I describe as golden lights that quickly illuminate me, waking me up, and other times they have pulled the sheets out from underneath me, and I have felt some breaths in my ear. They have made me feel like a liquid falls on my hair without these getting wet physically. And even when I am sick and I feel very bad, they have made me feel better using these golden lights that calm me down and lower the disease a little more. It is as if in those times they take care of me. In fact, I remember that sometimes when I was a child, about to fall from a high place in a very risky way, they literally made me float until I was left on the ground without damage, in that way taking care of me. I say thank you for that, even though I know I will not receive any audible response. That above is when I feel like tranquility, something good, but I have also come to experience hostile things. I have seen demons around us in generally amorphous forms, and others as dark and somehow red serpents with horns in a rolled up form stuck on the walls. It feels horrible to see them. I see them in a fraction of a second, but at the same time, it supernaturally feels like more time than it really was. It is difficult to explain, and they make me feel a very ugly heat, different from the good, but super uncomfortable heat waves, and they make me feel twice those things have pushed me. Very few times they have tried to possess me, not like in the movies, but by changing my personality. I've become very aggressive for a few seconds. They increase too much of my sociopathy in a very ugly way. Yes, I am a true sociopath, but I wrote that in Ask Reddit and made me see my eyes totally black in the mirror. It is really uncomfortable and scary to know that I will never be able to be alone, no matter where I go. Trying to ignore them is difficult. I think there can be other people with my damn ability, but so far I have not met anyone like me. Something happens in my brain, like a chemical reaction to those things, or I don't know, but many times when I feel that they move through my body, I feel this strange sensation as an electrifying tingling in my left side, bottom inside my head, and as far as I have checked all the people I have met or seen in my life, anyone I see in public, my friends, my family, nobody can see what I see, and what I just said is the tip of the iceberg of my damn strange ability, because there are also other things that are so amazingly strange or shocking paranormal, but they seem fantasy or science fiction, and therefore very rare, and I rarely talk about it, but believe me that they exist. It is true, we are not alone. It seems to me that our dimension relates or combines with other dimensions at the same time. Guy sprays my car at a stoplight. Posted by Hales 3942. I was at a stoplight at night, one where it intersects a busy highway, and while waiting for it to turn green, a man came up and started spraying my car. He came up the side and started spraying it with something. Then he continued to spray the front windshield. I tried talking to him through the window, like politely saying I didn't want him to do that. He kept spraying. When the light turned green, he was still in front of my car, so I couldn't go because I would hit him. When he got to the other side and was a safe enough distance away, I just took a right onto the road. He was also spraying his shoes. I felt bad because he looked homeless, but I didn't want to roll down the window, or God forbid, open the door and get out. I got my car washed right after. It was really strange and a little creepy. The school trip, posted by Noah Doa. Context: when on a school trip in Laos in haze season, knowing damn fucking well just how likely someone is to die. These school trips are notoriously bad and unsafe. I personally almost died twice and overheard what I'm fairly sure was a murder. All of us were 13 to 14 years old and weren't allowed to bring phones because nature is cool and phones are bad. According to our government, Laos is a bad place to go, and there are still active landmines in some areas. Me and one of my friends were sharing a room at this crappy sub 1-star hotel, which was absolutely infested with mosquitoes. The room was tiny, the windows were big, had trash little metal rotating curtain things and no locks. The bathroom had literal shit and blood in the shower, like enough blood and that it was clear someone either died or almost died recently, as it was still liquid. So on the window looks out to this little alleyway where like 5 homeless people are literally living and doing needle drugs. The only thing between them and us being a unlockable window. On the second night there, I was awakened by the sound of a thud against the window. I look up and open my knife that I kept in my hand while I slept, and see a man drenched in sweat and looking high as fuck. I loudly call out for help from the others in our trip, and the guy bolts out of the alleyway and leaves me and my friends. Are both just sitting there in each of our beds, waiting for someone from our trip to come check on us. But nobody came. Over the course of the next week, I got about 5 hours of sleep. "2,000 miles to get here, uninvited." A couple of years ago, I flew home to visit family. I'd be there about a week, then we'd head to the coast for a week, then back home for another week. I totally needed this break. I'd just ended an on-again, off-again relationship. Like seriously, one day on, the next day off. It took 7 months of putting up with it, because you're supposed to fight for what is important to you, right? Anyhow, I finally just said it was done. No more chances, no trying to work it out, just done. So, with that chapter of my life being over, I was more than happy to be somewhere else, surrounded by family, and begin putting myself back together. I got there, spent a couple of days sleeping a lot. My mother's a nurse, and she was becoming concerned that there was something physically wrong with me. I just needed a couple of days in a safe place where I could let my brain work on digesting the new life I would have when I got back home. So before we left for the coast, I met up with a friend from grade school that I'd kept in contact with over the years. I thought it would just be he and I, but it didn't really faze me that another person was there. We hung out for a while, and then I needed to head home because I had to take a backwards rural route to get home, or taking a different route that would add another 20 miles onto my trek. Being backwards, I needed to be able to keep an eye out for deer, so I said goodbye and told S.A. that if he was ever in my neck of the woods, look me up and we'd grab a drink and hang out. I told him to grab my number from my friend, and out the door I went. About halfway home, I got this weird queasy feeling in the pit of my stomach, so I slowed way down, and sure enough, there was a deer in the middle of the road. Because I had slowed down, I could see another car out on the road. I couldn't shake the queasy feeling, so I figured it would be better to cut off and go down to the main road, because there were more places to stop. I seriously didn't want to stop in some rural farmer's driveway. I've watched too many movies to make that mistake, so I get over to the main road and pull into a gas station and sit there for a couple of minutes, trying not to get sick to my stomach. I ran into the store, grabbed some water and ginger ale, and came back out to my vehicle. Still unable to shake that queasy feeling, so I started to head home from the gas station and knew I didn't want to go straight home, so I drove around, taking this road or that road until the weird feeling started to go away. Then I went home, read for a bit, and then went to sleep. The next day everything was fine and we headed off to the coast. Fast forward 2 weeks, trip is over. I'm still feeling a little bit fragile over the breakup, but that's all. I figured I would begin the process of cleansing the environment of negative energies and then work through the baggage that came from the breakup. I knew there was a lot and it would take time. So the next day I'm going about my business and everything is cool as can be when picking through the junk left behind after a breakup. I'm really just doing mindless things to zone out and not have to think too much on the activity, since my brain was working full time already. A little bit later in the day, my phone rings. I don't get a lot of calls, so I assumed that there might be a family emergency and that I needed to answer it ASAP. The area code of the caller, who is not in my contacts, is the same as my cousin, so I answered it without a second's thought. On the other end was SA, the acquaintance I met at my friend's house. It's a little weird to have him be calling me, but I'm not thinking that anything is terribly out of the ordinary. I asked him what he was up to, and he said he was at the airport. I still find it a little odd, but I said, "Oh, that's cool. Where are you going?" He said that he'd already landed. Again, I'm distracted and really just want to get him off the phone so I could go back to my mental sidestep and zone out while my brain chugged away. So I said that I hoped he had a good time wherever he was. He said that he needed me to pick him up. Screech. What? Did you just say you needed me to pick you up? Yeah, he replied. I came to visit you. Pause there for a second. I know for a fact that I didn't show any more interest in him than general courtesy. Even the tossed over the shoulder look me up comment was one of those polite things to say because you never actually plan on seeing them again. Unpause. Why did you come to visit me? I asked. He said he felt a deep connection and wanted to be with me. I'm starting to get angry as well as freaked out at this stage. I told him I didn't feel a connection at all and couldn't believe that he would fly across the country to see someone that he'd spent maybe 2 hours with. He said that I invited him when I said to look him up. I said, no, that's just a polite thing to say to some random person that has made a very small impression on me. He said that he needed to find a way back home then, since I misled him. WTF. Look me up if you're ever in my neck of the woods. Had led him to think that was a basis for any sort of encounter that was meaningful. He said that he needed a place to stay until he could get the money for a plane ticket back. I said there were more than enough hotels that he could stay at while he got himself sorted out. He said he didn't have any money after buying the random one-way plane ticket. So at this stage I'm flabbergasted, angry and freaked out that someone would do that on a one-way ticket. I finally caved and said he could stay the night while he sorted shit out, but I expected him to be gone no later than the morning of the day after tomorrow. So I bring him back to my place, throw pillows and blankets on the couch, and turn to head to my bedroom, and he asks if he can sleep with me. I'm like, no, actually no fucking way is that going to happen. So I point out that I have firearms and do not attempt to come in. Next day I have to work, so I woke him up and told him to get up and find a way home immediately. I also told him that I had to work but would check in on his progress, because the next morning I was dropping him off at departures regardless of whether he had a way back or not. Went to work. He blew up my phone all day, wanted me to come back to my place for lunch. I told him no, I'm way too busy. I finally get home from work and I'm chuckling at a text I got about my dog, and that's when I noticed that he rearranged everything, and by everything I mean every room of the house has been rearranged. I flipped my lid. I asked him why he thought it was normal to do anything like that. Instead of answering, he asked me who I'd been talking to. I said that it really wasn't any of his business, but I had received a text from the guy watching my dog while I was on vacation. Colour me shocked when he says that he doesn't want me to talk to that guy. No longer freaked, full force apocalyptic disaster is about to be unleashed and leave nothing but a smoking crater. The temperature drops about 10 degrees, and I very calmly said to get his shit, and I was calling a cab to take him to the airport because he's a fucking psycho. Side note, full rage has been achieved when it feels like the temperature drops and I speak very calmly. If I'm complaining about something, it's a quick burn. If I go monotone, calm and tilt my head to one side slightly, that is where I hit Arctic level anger. So he, unaware of the environmental change that has occurred and that the chances of survival are dropping by the second, decides to tell me that he used my computer and got my ex's phone number, and they both agree that I was just heartless. We're fast approaching the epic scale disaster, and he finally seems to notice how deep into rage I had sunk. I told him it was unlikely that he had gotten into my computer because it's a full quote of a part of The Art of War by Sun Tzu. He would have had to have been the processing power of the Hadron Collider computers, and it was obvious that was not the case. I told him he had 3 minutes to get his stuff and get out, or I wouldn't be responsible for what would occur. So, still yelling insults at me, he gathers his stuff and leaves. I used to get calls and texts from him. I'd block one and 6 more would pop up, but it eventually stopped. To this day I have no idea nor interest in knowing where he's at or if he made it back. So, crazy dude who would hop on a plane with a one-way ticket based on a random polite comment. Let's not meet again. They Won't Let Go. Posted by J. Rubus. What is evil? Selfishness. Every evil act, every rape, hit, murder, genocide springs from selfishness, from someone thinking only of themselves or of their tribe, someone giving into their perverted desires, someone wanting to make money or save themselves from embarrassment, woe or death. Jesus Christ, the paragon of good, was selfless and instructed his followers to be selfless as well. He died on a cross for other people's sins. What's more selfless than that? Whether you believe in him or not, the gospel makes clear that he considered selflessness the other ultimate good. Therefore, selfishness is the ultimate bad. When we all love and care for each other, the world is good. When we care only for ourselves, it is bad. Evil exists. I know this because my grandparents are evil. You wouldn't know it by looking at them. They're liberal, they recycle, they care about the planet, and they believe in science. My father is a Republican, and I grew up looking at Democrats as the bad guys. But even deep down, I admired my grandparents and thought in my own half-formed way that we should all strive to be like them. They both grew up in the 60s and met at Woodstock. Grandma came from the middle-class family that she rebelled against, and Grandpa came from the wrong side of the tracks, a fact of which he was perversely proud. I'm a real common man, he would say with a grin. By the time I was 15, in 2015, they were retired and living in a retirement community near Daytona Beach. In the summer of 2016, they invited me down to spend a few weeks with them. I barely got to see them after they moved in 2010. And I jumped at the chance, especially since my father and I didn't get along. Typical teenage rebellion stuff that looks stupid in hindsight. I took a plane to Daytona in early June, and they met me at the airport. "Hey, there you are," Grandpa said, and pulled me into a hug. There was something different about them. Something that bothered me for the first 2 days there, something that I just couldn't place. There was a glow about them, and the twinkle in my grandfather's eye was one of a much younger man, maybe even someone my age, a randy, mischievous boy who hadn't been worn down by 50 years of work, kids and mortgage payments. With Grandma the change was physical. She seemed, I don't know, more lively, like a young girl in the bloom of youth. I figured I kind of aged them up in my mind and thought of them as older and slower than they really were. They weren't that old after all, and had never been in anything approaching poor health. Their community, called Lamplighter, was a 55 and over trailer park in Port Orange near the South Daytona line. The trailers were all modern double wides, well maintained, and the yards were green and spacious. There was a clubhouse at the front of the park featuring a room for events, a little gym and a library. Next to it was a pool. The residents were all friendly and nice. My first day there, Grandma and Grandpa took me to a social event at the clubhouse, and I was the star of the show. Old men patted my back, old ladies pinched my cheek. It was kind of annoying, but also nice. Girls might get compliments all the time, but guys really don't, and it felt good to be the centre of attention for a little bit. The only downside was the handyman Jeff, close to 50. He was slow and crept around the edge of the room like an attack dog, his eyes always on me, like a painting that follows you around, no matter where you go. He's very protective of us, Grandpa explained. He's sort of our bodyguard. He laughed like that was the funniest thing ever. Don't worry about him. Grandma and Grandpa's next door neighbour was a guy named Jim Anderson. He wore polo shirts, plaid shorts, black socks pulled up his hairy calves, and putzed around his yard all day long, doing next to nothing. His granddaughter lived with him. Her name was Lindsay. I met her at the clubhouse one day when I was getting Grandma and Grandpa's mail. I slammed the little door and turned, and there she was, on the same mission. She was a few inches shorter than me, and thick, for lack of a better term. I can't bring myself to call her pudgy, even if maybe she was. Her long brown hair shimmered in the tropical sun, and she had this little gap in her front teeth that I instantly thought of as cute, not in a demeaning way, just I was attracted to her. I thought she was beautiful, and at that moment I saw her, my heart launched into my throat. She felt me staring and turned to look at me, her eyes narrowing suspiciously. Hey, I said. Hey, she replied cautiously. Kind of shocking to see someone around here who isn't 70. I live with my grandpa. Oh, I'm visiting mine. I shoved my hands nervously into my pockets of my hoodie and tried not to look like a dweeb. I'm Kyle. Lindsay, she said, and shut the mailbox. We walked back together and made small talk. I was awkward and she was uncomfortable. Looking back at it now, I cringe, but I also smile. Lindsay told me that her parents were killed in a car crash 3 years ago. She was a self-professed bookworm and old-fashioned. She liked the same music my grandparents did and had a real hard-on for the 70s and 80s. I just love everything about them, she gushed. Her face shone like a lamp, and if possible, she was even more beautiful than she was before. The clothes, the music, just everything. It was so much better back then. I wish I had a time machine. Because she didn't connect with our generation, Lindsay didn't have many friends. I've always gotten along better with older people. So you're one of them, I said cheekily, and nodded to an old woman in her yard. Lindsay laughed, I guess. She said that there were 5 teenagers in the community, all living with an older relative. They hung out at the clubhouse sometimes, sharing each other's company, because they were all they had in a place like this. She invited me to hang out with them, and 2 days later we met at the pool. There was Lindsay, a black boy named Nathan, a white boy named Evan, a white girl named Cassidy, and an Asian boy named Tran, who went by T. I like to keep it fresh, he told me with a big grin. Fresh as a dirty diaper, Nathan said and rolled his eyes. You got me fucked up, T said. Man, shut up, Nathan said. You sound so dumb. I thought y'all were supposed to be educated. School of Pimponomics. Class of 2016, T replied. Evan snorted, you wish. We hung out most of the day, and when it was over I decided that I liked them. It didn't last very long. 3 days later, T dropped out of sight. I went to his house and his grandparents said he moved in with an uncle in Iowa. There was something in their eyes that told me they weren't being entirely honest. I accepted their story anyway. I wish I hadn't. Me, Lindsay and the others would walk around the trailer park together, just talking and goofing off, and after a while I realised that every time we did, Jeff would pass in his old truck and glare at us, then follow us on foot, pretending to do other things, but glaring at us like he expected us to do something wrong. I kind of got that even then. Some teens do dumb shit, but the murder in his eyes creeped me out. Did he do something to T? Handyman Jeff, more like Jeff the Killer. Hey, in early June, Evan disappeared. Same thing. His grandparents said he moved away. Their eyes were red as though they'd been crying, and his grandmother's voice trembled as she told me he was gone. It felt like she was telling me he had died. The rest of us talked about it. Nathan agreed with me that something was wrong. Cassidy thought we were stupid. Lindsay just looked uncomfortable. I'm sure it's nothing, she said. Kids come and go here. You know that. Yeah, Nathan said, a little too much. Because they visit. Not all of them, Nathan pointed out. How many kids have we known who moved away? Lindsay fell silent. He's wrong, she told me later. We were walking aimlessly along one of the twisting streets after dark. The humid light of the moon playing in her hair. There's nothing strange about it at all. He's just paranoid. I didn't notice the hint of desperation in her voice. I didn't realise she was begging me to believe her. If I had, I may have known she was lying to me. Maybe, I said. I don't know. She stopped and looked at me, her eyes dark and mysterious. Really, don't get caught up in some conspiracy stuff. We gazed into each other's eyes, and slowly, like the moon pulling the tide, our lips met. She kissed me, her tongue light and timid, and I kissed her back, mine clumsy and overeager. She grabbed the front of my hoodie and pulled me closer, and I cupped her face in my hands. The kiss deepened and became more urgent. Her heart pounded against mine, and I remember thinking, she's really into it. I was too dumb to realise that she was just a lost soul, a stranger in a strange land, who had always been alienated from other kids by her obsession with times gone by. I didn't realise that, deep down, she was sad and alone, and on the outside looking in, that she was desperate for someone, a boy her own age, to understand her. I just thought she liked me. She pulled away from me and flashed a dreamy smile. That was nice, she said. Yeah, I said, the taste of her mouth like candy on my lips. It was. I put my arm around her and we walked home. The next day I went over to Nathan's house. His grandfather, a stooped man in a baseball cap, boasting the name of the company he served with in Vietnam, appeared at the door. Is Nathan here? I asked. Even if I live to be 1,000, I'll never forget the look of hatred that crossed his wizened face, his bushy eyebrows angled down in a deadly V, and his puckered lips drew into a weird sneer. The venom in his expression struck me like a fist to the stomach, and I stumbled back against the railing. He's not here, he spat. He went to visit his aunt. His eyes hardened as he spoke, and his lips puckered even more, as though the words were sour in his mouth. Oh, okay. He slammed the door, even though it was almost 90 degrees. A shiver raced down my spine. I turned and froze. Across the street, Jeff stood next to a bush in someone's front yard, a pair of shears at his side. He was staring at me. His expression was much like Nathan's grandfather. An old woman came out of her trailer and walked over to him. He turned to her, and the hate was gone, replaced by the look of a small puppy overjoyed to see its master. I took the opportunity to escape and made my way to the clubhouse. I found Lindsay and Cassidy sitting in the library. Lindsay smiled when she saw me, but it faded away at my pale-faced expression. I sat down across from them and stole a look around, crazily convinced that Jeff would be there, like a killer from a bad horror movie, who can be anywhere he wants, anytime he wants to be there. Nathan's gone, I said. I told them what happened, and the colour drained from Cassidy's face. Come on guys, Lindsay said. It's nothing. He only went to visit his aunt. He's coming back. Seems kind of strange that it just happened like this, I said. He didn't even mention it. "That's Nathan for you," she said. I was stupid and in love, so I listened to her. I trusted Lindsay over my own gut instinct, and I accepted a lie once again. After Nathan disappeared, I didn't see much of Cassidy. I spent most of my time with Lindsay. We would sit in the padded swing of her front porch, talking and holding hands. When her grandfather wasn't around, we touched and kissed. When he was around, she would show me music videos from the 70s and 80s on her phone. I didn't really like any of it, but her face always lit up when the music started to play, and she would stare at the screen with a sly little smile, mesmerized. That's how she looked with each video. She lost herself in a time that she never knew, a time that she fetishized and revered only the way someone who wasn't really there can. For her, the 80s were a warm, fuzzy dream. Nothing bad happened there. It was perfect. It was paradise. On July 25th, I can still remember every detail. Lindsay's grandfather was away. She led me into her bedroom and we kissed on her bed until we were heady and drunk on one another. Our hands roamed and our bodies quaked with need. She was never more beautiful than she was, with her hair pulled around her head like a halo. And no woman has ever felt as right as Lindsay did. Someone somewhere said that your first name is always awful, but mine wasn't. At the end of July, Grandma and Grandpa started acting strangely. Grandpa wouldn't look at me in the face, and when Grandma did, I saw mourning in her eyes, the atmosphere light and summery. Since June turned dark and tense, Grandpa didn't joke and twinkle, and all the Grandma's liveliness seemed to have drained away overnight. It was almost like someone died. I asked them what was wrong, but they said everything was fine. Bullshit. It was probably a cancer diagnosis or something. One of them was sick, and the doctors didn't think they'd make it. Dread gnawed at me, and I laid awake at night in worry. I'm not exactly the best at sharing my emotions. I keep things to myself, but Lindsay managed to drag it out of me one day. We were sitting on her grandfather's padded porch swing, our fingers entwined and Lindsay's head resting on my shoulder. She always squeezed so tight, just like she was afraid someone would take me away from her. "It's probably nothing," I said haltingly. I'm kind of scared." When she didn't reply, I turned to look at her. Unshed tears shimmered in her eyes. A single bead streaked down her freckled cheek like a fleck of diamond, and my heart dropped. "What?" I asked. She shook her head. "Nothing, I was just thinking." "About what?" "How much I don't want you to leave." Is it possible for something to sound like a lie and the truth at the same time? Can someone mean what they say but mean something else? I pulled my hand out of hers and pulled my arm around her shoulder. She melted into me and we just sat there. The only sound, the hiss of the wind in the trees and the metallic twinkle of wind chimes. I wanted to promise I wouldn't leave her, that we could stay together, but I couldn't, so I said nothing. Friday night, August 2nd. I was sitting in my room and scrolling through Discord when Grandpa came in without knocking. Grandpa always knocked. I looked up and his face was pale and drawn. He looked far, far older than I'd ever seen him. In an instant I knew something was wrong. Lindsay's here. That's not what I expected to hear at all. Your grandmother's dead, maybe, or I have terminal AIDS. Why did he look so upset? Lindsay was here. I put my computer aside, pulled on my hoodie and went outside. Lindsay stood at the bottom of the stairs, and when she saw me, the corners of her mouth turned up in a pallid smile. "Hey," I said. "Hey," she replied gloomily. "What's up?" I asked. She shrugged. "I just wanted to see if you wanted to go for a walk." Hand in hand, we made our way towards the clubhouse. I told her about my grandfather, and she listened silently. Her grip on my hand tightened, and the closer we got. Then I thought she did it to comfort me, but now I think it was out of desperation. The clubhouse appeared in the distance, every window blazing with light. Something was happening. A 90th birthday party, or a 50th anniversary maybe. Lindsay stopped me. I turned to face her, pushing up on her tippy toes. She held my face in her hands and kissed me. Were those tears in her eyes again? "I love you," she said. "I love you too," I replied. Did I mean it? I don't know. I was 15. Did she mean it in her own way? I think she did. Holding my hand again, she led me purposefully toward the clubhouse, her grip forcing my knuckles together. We were at the back door, by the mailboxes, when she let go. Her hand fluttered to her face and she began to cry. I opened my mouth, but something hit me from behind and I blacked out. I came awake gradually, like a diver rising from the depths. My head throbbed in a sickly rhythm, with my heart and my stomach churned so badly I almost puked. I pushed myself to a sitting position, and a wave of nausea crashed over me. I moaned and almost went down again. When I recovered, I looked around, my heartbeat speeding up. I was in a cage, in the storeroom, murky light emanating from an overhead bulb. I was naked, save for my boxers, and there was a dog collar around my neck. A door opened and Lindsay came in, her eyes pointed ashamedly at her feet. She wore a long brown robe with the hood pushed back. Her face was white and her steps somber. "What's going on?" I asked, panic gripping me. "What's happening?" Still not looking at me, Lindsay knelt before the cage. I tried to stop them. "Who?" I asked. "The masters." My head spun. Masters? Who were the masters? "I really tried," she said, her voice breaking, "but you were chosen." "For what?" I asked. Finally she looked up at me, great sadness in her eyes. "As a sacrifice." Before I could reply, Jeff came in, a leash in one hand and a cattle prod in the other. Lindsay produced a key from the folds of her robe and unlocked the cage. Jeff dragged me out, attached the leash to the collar and shoved me towards the door, making me stumble. They led me into the main room where all the events were held, and what I saw froze my blood. All of the residents, old men, old ladies, people I'd spent the summer getting to know were crowded in the middle of the floor, each one wearing a robe like Lindsay's. Jerking left and right, I saw Nathan's grandparents, Evan's, mine. Grandma looked away, tears streaming down her face, and Grandpa gazed into the other, regret stamped onto his face. At the head of the room was a metal X-shaped thing on a raised platform. Mr. Anderson stood next to it and watched me with disdain as Jeff and Lindsay strapped me into it, binding my wrists and ankles. Lindsay stroked my cheek, favoured me with a longing look, then joined the crowd. Mr. Anderson's voice filled the room, rich and booming. We are gathered here tonight as the last generation, the greatest generation, the generation that shall not pass. Forever, everyone intoned. Winter approaches each of us, but we will not give it quarter. We will not allow ourselves to fade away. We have built the altar and the works upon it, and we will not hand them down. I struggled against my bonds, sputtering broken words and half-coherent prayers. I flexed and rolled my wrists. The right one, the one Lindsay secured, was loose. We will not lay down and let the new generation, an inferior generation, take our place. This is our world, and we will cede it to no one. He withdrew a wickedly sharp knife from beneath his robe, and terror burst into me. We will consume the blood of this boy, and it will sustain us. On their blood we will live, on their bones we will build, with their lives we will dwell in power forever. Forever. I yanked, tugged, and arched my back. The strap was looser. If I pulled just a little more, I could get my hand free. Mr. Anderson took a step toward me, but a long, high scream stopped him. Everyone turned to look at Nathan's grandmother. Her chest rose and fell, and her eyes bulged from their sockets in madness. "This isn't right," she screamed. "We can't do this." Her husband tried to calm her, but she pulled away. "It's wrong. You killed my grandbaby, and it's wrong." She broke down in tears. Mr. Anderson looked at Jeff, and Jeff walked over. Nathan's grandfather glared. "You stay away from her. Can't you see she's mourning?" "There is no mourning," Anderson said. Jeff grabbed Nathan's grandfather with surprising speed. Nathan's grandfather punched him in the face. A shocked murmur ran through the room, and Mr. Anderson went to go help his minion. Jeff, having recovered, lunged for Nathan's grandfather and pinned him to the wall. Nathan's grandmother screamed and attacked Jeff with a flurry of slaps. Jeff shoved her away and someone held her back. I flexed and rolled my wrists harder and harder and harder. Finally my hand slipped out, and working on pure adrenaline, I unstrapped my other hand and my feet. "He's getting away," someone cried. I jumped from the platform and bolted to the nearest door, my bare feet slapping against the tiles, and my heartbeat echoing through my head. They chased me, but I didn't look back. I couldn't look back. Slamming through the doors, I ran down the street towards the main road, where traffic streaked by in both directions. I don't remember almost being hit by a car. I don't remember how I wound up in the back of a police cruiser sobbing hysterically. I wished I didn't remember any of it. The police didn't believe my story. Grandma and Grandpa cooked up a story about a fight and said I ran away. Dad bought it because he thought I was an asshole, and Mum bought it because who wants to believe that their parents are killers? I haven't spoken to anyone about this since it happened. Not Mum, not Dad, and not my grandparents. They send me cards for my birthday and Christmas, but I never read them. Last month I got one for Easter, and I don't know why, but I looked inside. "We're sorry," Grandma had written, "but we're afraid to let go." I believe them. They're terrified of letting go and passing away. They're terrified of growing old and dying. They're terrified of us. Well, my little hellhounds, that's it for tonight. Please don't forget to subscribe and click the bell so you know every time I upload. If you have a story you would like narrated on the channel, then submit it to Reddit r/homeofscares and follow me on Twitter @homeofscares. Now, good night, my little hellhounds.